Okay, Steve, it looks like we're live. Welcome everyone to our second Pivot Series webinar. Very excited to bring these conversations to you about succeeding in the virtual classroom and the various kinds of pivoting we've all had to do. I did want to just really quickly before we get started, I just wanted to say that I know that conversations of this kind can maybe feel a little bit flippant, given the social justice moment that we're all living in. So I did not want to start before I personally said that I'm aware that there's a lot going on in the world. I'm aware that there's a privilege and a luxuriousness to having conversations of this kind during this moment. And I just wanted to make sure that that was on the table to begin. My name is RJ Jenkins. I'm a curriculum designer for the Columbia University Center for Veteran Transition and Integration, and it is my privilege to be here with Steve O'Connell. If you were with us for our last webinar, you have the benefit of knowing who Steve is, but for those of you who don't, Steve, I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Stephen O'Connell. I am Assistant Dean of Students at the School of General Studies at Columbia University. So in my role, I advise students, mostly non-traditional students, adult students through their undergraduate path. I do some teaching and programming, and I'm really excited to be here with you and with RJ today.
It's so exciting to have Steve with us because, wow, my pandemic hair. Whoa, you needed to warn me, Steve. You gotta warn me about these things. It's very exciting to have Steve with us again. For those of you who were with us for our last conversation, what's so exciting about Steve's perspective on some of the things we're discussing is that he is working with students virtually right now. He's doing some virtual advising. He is helping them navigate the transition from being in the classroom, being physically in space with other students, to taking your learning into Zoom world. But he is also himself a student who is making this transition. He is earning his master's degree at Columbia University. So he comes at these things from a bunch of different angles. And Steve and I are colleagues and friends, and it's always nice to talk to him. So Steve, thank you for carving out the time. I want to jump right in because I think for most of our students who are listening, the spring has ended. The spring term has ended. If it hasn't ended, it's about to end really soon. As we all know, the nature of learning, especially for on-campus students, changed basically overnight in the middle of March in response to the global COVID-19 pandemic. Instruction moved online, laboratories moved online, library resources moved online. And that was a kind of a major transition. Now we're entering the summer term. Many students are taking summer courses, and those are being offered almost exclusively in this online format. But this time, it's not a surprise, right? This time, everyone kind of understood that this is what the summer was going to look like. We still have a little bit of uncertainty about the fall, but walking into summer courses, most schools are going to have several summer terms. In many cases, summer courses are a little bit accelerated, that the nature of the courses is a little bit accelerated. So I wanted to start, Steve, by just getting your thoughts on what's different for students walking into summer classes online. What's different for them with that versus what they experienced in the spring? And of course, not only what they experienced, but with what faculty experienced as well.
Yeah, absolutely, RJ. I mean, it's so clear that what happened across the country in the spring really caught everyone off guard, as RJ said, and we collectively, faculty, students, administrators, sort of everyone involved with higher ed, with education, jumped online very quickly and with varying degrees of comfort and experience with the virtual online classroom. And that goes for students and for faculty. Some faculty have designed courses in the past and taught online. Some have, this is their first time, or the spring rather, was their first time, and the same goes for students. So I think the biggest difference this time around is that we have all had a little bit of practice with this. I think that during the spring, we saw, and I hope this holds true for everyone listening today, that there was a really extraordinary outpouring of support and flexibility and understanding from our faculty really across the board. Not least of all because they were experiencing this crisis right along with their students. But now that we're entering the summer semester, I think that some of that sort of flexibility is going to change. It's going to revert back to the very high expectations that our faculty have for their students during typical semesters. And I think that's good. I think that's what we want. But I think there is going to be an adjustment there that students will have to make. And it's important to acknowledge that it is not going to feel the same way it felt in the spring when everything happened rapidly. The classroom is going to be a little bit more structured, organized, and the expectations are certainly going to be higher now that we've all had our first go around.
You know, it's funny. I'm speaking with faculty. We have the privilege at the center to collaborate with and interact with faculty at colleges, universities, and community colleges across the country. And this is the thing that I'm hearing more and more, is that especially as faculty become more comfortable in this format, more comfortable in this medium, they feel also more comfortable asking their students to step up, right? So I think that's absolutely right. And Steve, I'd imagine that's not to say that everyone's 100% comfortable and we all know exactly what we're doing, right? That's not what you're suggesting.
Absolutely not. This continues to be a learning process for most. There are certainly institutions and instructors that are this is their A game. This is what they do. They teach online courses. They design this curriculum. They are experts in the pedagogy of online learning. But I think it's safe to say for the vast majority of us, we are still learning how to go about this, how to maximize our time in the classroom, and really how to be comfortable with this new reality of online learning that we're all taking part in right now, and will continue to take part in for the foreseeable future. It's seeming.
Yeah, I don't think, you and I had a conversation offline about this, but this notion that all of this is just something that we had to deal with temporarily. And I think we'll talk about this more later, but it's pretty clear, I think, at this point that if it is temporary, it's a longer kind of temporariness than we were expecting. But in fact, I expect that certain amounts of this will be with us, if not permanently, then for a long time to come.
Absolutely. I agree. I think that elements of it, certainly, even when universities are able to go back to the in-person classroom and more in-person events and conversations, I don't know that we will go back to 100% the way we did business before. And if we do get there, which I certainly hope we do, it's going to take some time. So right now we are living in the extreme of fully remote, full online classroom. And I think that extreme will begin to subside over time, but I don't think that this type of learning is ever going to go away, certainly. And I think that we would all do well to really prepare ourselves to learn some best practices and get a little bit more comfortable with this style of learning and working moving forward.
I think that's right. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that a little later on in the session. You said the magic word in your earlier comment about time, about maximizing our time, being as effective as possible. This webinar is about being motivated and effective in what I call Zoom world. And I think one of the things that's been so fascinating, and we talked about this the last time we talked, was this notion or this feeling that I think is a false feeling, that all of the sudden everyone has all of this time, right? For most of us, we're no longer commuting, or at least not in the ways that we've been accustomed to. For some people, that's as many as 2 to 3 hours of their day each day. That time has been sort of restored to us, for lack of a better word. We're not socializing in the ways that maybe we were, depending on what part of the country you're in. We're doing less of that kind of thing, and there is, I think, an efficiency to this world that we're in. But I know you feel this way, Steve, and I just wanted to get your feeling on it. Is that do you think that's really what's going on here? I mean, do people have all this time all of a sudden, and is there a trap there that we need to be careful about?
I absolutely think that there's a trap there. There's I think a false sense of we have regained all of this time by living in quarantine or eliminating some of these things from our lives, commuting, socializing, traveling. Some things that we would like to maybe eliminate, our commute, other things that are really painful to eliminate, especially as we move into the summer. And I think that's, part of the crux there is that there is something real about the emotional loss of so many parts of our lives. And that takes up time, that takes up mental real estate, that takes up energy. And we don't necessarily gain that back to then be able to redistribute towards our academic work or our actual work. And I think it's also important to note that there's been things added into our lives that previously weren't there. Many of you are dealing with childcare alongside working and taking classes. Many of you are caring for someone else in your life. I mean, the list really goes on. Everyone has a complicated life, particularly complicated during a pandemic, and the efficiency of the online world and the efficiency of working at home doesn't equate to found hours and hours of time and energy.
I feel like, and even if, certainly I think I'm looking at my summer, and there is a feeling of a kind of emptiness. I'm no longer traveling for work in the same way. There are things that we were planning to do that we're not going to do, and I think it's possible to both register a kind of space in the long term, but these individual days, they pass through your hands like sand, I feel like.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that I have heard from a lot of students, a lot of colleagues and friends and family that the days are blending together in a way that they don't typically blend together. Maybe you're right. Beginning to miss your commute, which you hated in the past, but
yeah.
But there is some real grieving there, and to lose all of the things that we're used to, the milestones of graduation, of events, of family, of weddings, of all of the things that happen over the summer, our barbecues and our everyday normal things that we really have to rethink. And the process of rethinking, replanning, restructuring our lives, although we've now been doing this for quite some time, regardless of where you're living in the country right now, there's been some changes over and over. There is still a constant adjustment that we're all dealing with. Here in New York City, we are entering phase one of our reopening, and cities and towns and states across the country are in some varying degree of phase, and that holds something quite different for different folks around this country. But what that means is that moving forward, every couple of weeks, we are going to continuously deal with an adjustment.
That's right.
And that adjustment is going to impact our everyday lives in different ways. And that can throw us for a loop. And that can sort of start to seep into our time and energy that we're able to commit to our online courses, our Zoom world. And how do we deal with that? How do we stay motivated? I think is a really important question. And it's important to acknowledge that things are going to keep changing ever so slightly, and every time that they do, it's absolutely normal for there to be a little bit of a shakeup in other parts of your life.
I want to break this down for folks listening, Steve, because we speak sort of broadly about time. Let's get specific. So I know certainly at Columbia, we use this ratio, the ratio I'm about to give you. You're very familiar with it yourself. I think though that this is a ratio I've seen utilized across the country at higher education institutions, and that is the idea that at the level of a college classroom, a university course, you should expect to do something like 2, 3, 4, we'll say 2 to 4 hours of work outside of the classroom for every hour you spend inside the classroom, or in this case, inside the classroom, right? For every hour of instruction, there are 2 to 4 hours of self-instruction, of homework, review, of preparation, whatever the kinds of things you're doing outside of class. I don't know that that ratio is holding steady in this new environment.
I absolutely agree. To break this down even further, if you're enrolled in a 3-credit course, a 3-credit-hour course, each week you would expect to do 3 hours per credit of outside the classroom time, intellectual time, studying, tutoring, homework assignments, problem sets, writing, research, etc. So that 3-credit course times about 3 hours. You said 2 to 4, so about 3 hours of homework. That's 9 hours per week of outside the classroom time. And that's when that holds true when you are in person. And there's all sorts of touch points and intellectual work that is going on in the in-person classroom that's just not able to happen in the Zoom world. So professors, and you may be experiencing this right now, instructors will be adding in additional touch points that are going to drive that outside the classroom hour up. Mm-hmm. So for example, you may be asked to be posting on discussion boards, writing short response papers, doing quizzes, doing additional homework assignments, expected to have one-on-ones with your instructor or TA. Some of these things are probably true during a normal semester in person. Many of them have been added in as a result of this online pedagogy, this online curriculum that we're all moving towards, which is driving up what the amount of time you have to spend outside the classroom doing work for your classes.
And I want us together, Steve, you first and me second, but I want to respond to the student who's experiencing these additional touch points, as you call them. Perhaps the additional weekly thought papers, or the additional logging of time, with colleagues or with fellow students in a chat room, or additional office hours, virtual office hours, phone conversations with faculty or with students. How do you respond to the student who registers that as a kind of busy work? Because I don't think, my instinct is that that's not what faculty are trying to do in this moment.
Yeah, so I think that's a really, really great question to bring up, and a really normal way to react to some of those types of assignments. What I would say is that is the faculty member's effort to give the responsibility for learning back to the student. And many of those assignments are probably going to be fairly broad. They're going to be, the baseline is that you participate. You record that that discussion post, you record that one paper response. And to make it not busy work, the responsibility is on the student to elevate the level at which they engage with that work. And that's really, I think, the crux of the difference between the in-person and the online, is that there is just so much more responsibility for our learning that we have to take on as students, that comes much more organically in the in-person teaching world.
It's interesting. As we prepare to have these discussions, I just get thinking about these topics a little bit, and it does. This is going to sound kind of crazy, but I never thought about the classroom as a place that could enable a kind of laziness, right? And I don't mean laziness in terms of not doing your work, or but this notion that as long as you showed up to class, and as long as you were physically present, you were doing your job as a student, right? I think we've all been there. We've all gotten to class, and then just kind of, because we were sat in the classroom, we felt good about the work that we were doing, even if we were completely passive, even if we weren't really listening particularly closely, even if we weren't taking good notes. I think that comfort zone is gone. But with the right attitude, I think it could be a really, really empowering thing.
I totally agree. I think that, equally in the Zoom world, you can show up for class and sort of learn by just your presence, and that's okay. Sometimes we just got to do that, right? Sometimes you just got to sit in the back of the class and be there and do what you can. for whatever reason. And I think now, more than ever, of all the things going on in the world, you may show up for your Zoom classes, and you just got to kind of get there, be there, participate as much as possible, and get through it. I think those things are fairly equal in person and online. But I think what you're saying is right, RJ. The difference becomes that we can't feel as good, or as we don't feel as productive if we don't feel as productive or as good about the work we've done by simply showing up in the Zoom world as we do by simply showing up to the lecture hall.
That's right.
And that's where that responsibility comes back in with that, as you said, adjustment in your attitude a little bit. We can take those additional touch points and make them where the real learning happens.
Because here's the thing about online learning that I'm sort of learning as we go is actually taking an online course, showing up to the lectures, listening as best you can, stepping away from the lectures, and then taking ownership of your own learning in a variety of ways. That's just what learning looks like for every day of your life after you leave college, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's what learning is. Learning very rarely later in life is showing up to a lecture hall with a whole bunch of other people who are interested in the same thing you are, right? Learning, whether it's how to change your oil, whether it's how to grow tomatoes, whether it's how to raise your kids, whatever it is, this thing that we're all being asked to do in the context of university education looks so much more like what learning looks like every day after that.
100%. And I think this is a really good moment, RJ. Something that we were talking about before is if a couple things are true. Number one, we're most likely going to be in this virtual learning environment for the near, possibly long-term future. Number two, whenever it is we do return to somewhat of normal, there is most certainly going to be online elements to that. And number three, if this is what learning looks like throughout life, moving forward, as you just pointed out, then how can we capitalize on this summer as a lab for preparing for all three of those things in the future?
Yeah. You said this to me in a previous conversation, and as I told you, I just was really delighted by this metaphor of thinking about your summer courses as a laboratory, as an experiment, as a place where you can try things and tweak your practices and figure out how to get good at this thing, so that moving forward, no matter how much of our curriculum stays virtual, we've had an opportunity to kind of build a set of practices around how to do this. Is that kind of what you mean by that?
That's exactly what I mean. Let's build some strong practices in a really deliberate way. I think with a sense of with thoughtfulness and a sense of deliberately thinking about the future in a way that we weren't able to react in the spring. We were not able to do a whole lot of long-term planning or a whole lot of deliberate thinking about our best practices during the spring semester because everything has happened so quickly.
Sure.
And at that point, it was unclear how long this would be. It's becoming much more clear that this isn't temporary. I think over the spring, I can speak for myself as both an administrator and as a student, I set up several systems for myself, but I was thinking about them as temporary systems.
Sure.
And therefore, I gave them the level of thoughtfulness and creativity that a temporary system deserves, which isn't a whole lot. It's become much more clear that those systems are going to be critical for my future success as an administrator, as a student, as a teacher, all of those things. And I need to sort of use this summer as a way to be more deliberate about that, so that going into the fall, not only that I can be successful this summer, but going in the fall, I have a jump on that.
So Steve, give me an example. So you're and I think this is exactly right. You said you put some systems in place to get through the spring semester, right? To power through, to get it done, to show up, to participate, and to submit your assignments. And those systems, if you could call them systems, right? They probably felt a little bit more like Band-Aids, or a little bit more like, I don't know, they were pretty, I think it's fair to say for all of us, whether we were students, whether we were figuring out how to work in this environment, everything was pretty play as you go.
Yeah.
Now you're talking about, okay, maybe some of these systems need to be reimagined because they may be more permanent. Give me an example of what does this look like in real life in terms of a temporary system becoming more permanent, or developing a new practice because you're pretty sure that you're going to be spending more time in Zoom world regardless of what happens.
Yeah. So this is something that I am still working on myself. I think we
Yeah.
all are. So a couple of things that I've noticed. Number one, I found this particular very small change to be very helpful, and actually one of my students recommended it to me. On my computer, I have begun using two separate browsers. So I use Google Chrome for my personal life and my work, and I use Safari specifically for schoolwork.
That's awesome.
And
That's ingenious.
and this is from a student of mine. So
Yeah.
I take no credit. But what this has done for me is we talk a lot about we have talked a lot about in the past, our past webinar, about creating a designated workspace for yourself. And I know that this is important for a lot of folks to create a designated workspace within your apartment, your home, for yourself, so that you can go there to work and leave there when you're not working. And that can be a mindset shift for yourself. Well, now so much of our lives are on computers, our personal lives, our Zoom happy hours, our Zoom time with our family. So we're sort of doing all of these things on our computer, and there's no separation.
Mm-hmm.
The very simple downloading of an additional browser and separating out those types of interfaces made a really big impact on my ability to check in and check out when I needed to, and to focus in on the work, and close the other browser completely. I wasn't getting any updates. I wasn't getting any reminders, and really focusing on the work.
I feel like these separations that we're all told are so important between school and work and life. That that's a tall order in the current environment.
Yeah.
Even I think I'm calling you out, Steve. I'm not sure, but even something as sort of intuitive as you transitioned to a standing desk during this period, didn't you?
I did do that. Yes, the first. So we're in week here in New York City. We're in week 13,
Mm-hmm.
and I know that's different for folks around the country, but we're in week 13. And for the first 6 or 8 weeks, I was at a old kitchen table circle, just a round kitchen table with a regular chair. And as it became increasingly clear that this was going to last much longer than originally anticipated, I transitioned to a standing desk, and I invested in an office chair. And it has made a huge difference for me in terms of really having a desk that is where I work, and it's just a simple table, but it's at a standing height. It's not anything fancy, and I think that the sort of investment in a couple of tools to help me do my work has been worth it.
Yeah, and that may not be the everyone's goal, or it may not work for everybody, but I think the point here towards some of the things we talk about in university studies, right? Pay attention to what's working for you and be prepared to do a little bit of experimenting, right? That it may not be the case that everyone wants to work at a standing desk, but understanding that something wasn't feeling right and trying something a little different, that seems to be the right play.
Absolutely the message. And to take that a step further, thinking about our laboratory summer, I'm hoping that folks are taking 1, 2, maybe 3 classes over the summer, but probably not as many as you're intending or typically take in a fall semester.
Right.
It takes a lot of effort and work to be a really thoughtful learner. What is working? What is not working? Where are the changes I have to make? And be deliberate about that. That takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort. It's better to do those things when you're in less classes over the summer, so that you can then put them into play for the fall when you're in a more full-time schedule.
Yeah, the summer does tend to be a slightly lower stakes environment, right? And gives us the flexibility to do some of this experimentation. I remember when I used to teach first semester students at Columbia, who had just entered. You come to school, and I know we have some people in the room who are entering their Columbia education, and their first courses are summer courses, right? So I mean, this is for them as well. But I remember, you're so amped up to start. You're so excited about being in a new environment. The start of a semester is always an exciting time, and you sometimes bite off a little bit more than you can chew. And what I say to students all the time is, there is this invisible course on your transcript. There is this invisible course that you are taking, and it doesn't have a name and it doesn't have a call number, and you're not technically paying for it, but it exists, and it consists of you trying to figure out how to do all the things that you've not done before. And I would venture to say that in this virtual environment, students are enrolled in that very same course again, that invisible course that won't show up on their transcript, that is all of these kinds of learning, all of the tweaking, all of the paying attention to set up best practices. That stuff takes what you would call mental real estate, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I would say not only are new students experiencing that, I think everybody's experiencing that invisible course of how do I make this work in my very complicated life in a way that for most of us we've had no experience before. Doing the full combination. Many of us have done one or two of these things, worked from home, taken online courses. Many of us have done parts of what our life looks like right now. I think few of us have done it all at the same time. So everybody is enrolled in that invisible course of how do I make this work? How do I get myself to a place where I can make this work long term?
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to spend just a little bit of time before we turn to people's questions, Steve. I know that you're a student yourself. I know that you are working with hundreds of students who are managing virtual classes, and obviously, we can link to articles, and everyone on today's Zoom is going to get an email with a few links that we think are helpful. And those are the hacks and the tips and the strategies, some of those practical things. But what you just said something really cool about two separate browsers for school and for work, or for school and for life. I love the sheer practicality of that suggestion. Are there any other things you're seeing students do right now, from a pure practical standpoint, or that you yourself are doing to keep yourself energized, engaged, and enthused about not only taking your courses, but managing them in this particular format?
Yeah. So I want to bring up sort of three different things that are I think can be applied right away.
Okay.
Number one, I think that in regular life there are so many organic moments that we take a break and we step away and we move our bodies. Yep. And in our online world, there's so few of those organic moments. And what I would recommend is that the 15, 20, 30, whatever minutes you can take before and after an online course, take those to step away from your computer and your course, because we use that time to walk from wherever we are, commute from wherever we are, and get to the classroom. And then after that class ends, we walk out and we get to whatever our next thing is. And that time is never thought of as wasted time, right? We're using that time to get to the thing we got to do. Now that we're in the Zoom world, there's this very, very, very tempting moment where the Zoom class ends, the online course ends, you leave the meeting, and you immediately open up a browser to begin working on that next thing. You immediately check your email. And I am 100% guilty of this. I would say one thing to do right away.
Because not doing that, right, Steve, feels in this environment like you're wasting time, right?
Totally, yeah. Right, exactly. In this environment, it's like, well, I can be super efficient, right? Why would I go walk outside? I don't have anywhere to go.
That's silly, right?
Why would I do a lap? Why would I do 15 push-ups? I did my workout this morning.
Right.
Whatever the case may be, I would say right now, block your calendar 15, 20, 30 minutes before and after, and utilize that time to move your body, clear your head, and be off the screen. And if you build that habit in right now, which is a tough one to build in, you'll be better prepared to use it come fall.
And I'm gonna interject here really quickly. I think there's also I think what you're saying is exactly right, and just the break is important. But I think there's also some metacognitive work that's going on when we give ourselves a minute to unwind. Right, we're also in the process of processing what we just heard. We're thinking back the way that you do when you walk out of a movie, right? When you walk out of a movie, yes, you walk out and you're walking to your car, but what are you doing? You're thinking about what you just heard, what you just saw. You're kind of subconsciously, you're identifying your favorite moments. You're asking yourself some questions, and all of that work gets done only if we don't immediately re-engage our brain, right? We have to give our brain a rest. So I think there are like 85 different things that happen that are all good things when we take a minute to just disengage. And it's the opposite, I think, metacognitively, it's the opposite of a waste.
100%, RJ, 100%. And the movie is a great metaphor for this. When you leave, you're making connections that you didn't realize in the moment. You're thinking about the other movies that actor or actress were in. Right. You're thinking about what the sequel might hold. And the same is happening after a class, but only if you create the space to do that for yourself.
Cool. Sorry, you said you had one or two other things.
Yeah, two other things. One other thing I think that has been really helpful for me is remembering pen and paper. It's really easy in this online world, just do everything on the computer. Right. And if you saw my desk right now, there's Post-its everywhere. I'm constantly writing myself reminders and trying to put pen to paper, and not doing everything on my computer. And I think this is a really hard practice to keep up when your readings are online, the articles that are being presented, your discussion posts, the papers that you're writing. You're probably submitting problem sets online. You're doing exams and quizzes online. We can forget the use or the real value of pen and paper. As much as you can, roll that into your routine and the way that you study.
Yep, great.
And then the last thing I'll say, RJ, is right now is a really challenging time to think and plan long term. We really don't even know what the fall is going to hold for many institutions. Even the institutions that have announced what they are going to be doing for the fall, they're still figuring out the mechanics of that.
Sure.
And you're probably still figuring out the mechanics of what the summer and the fall are going to look like in your life. Well, maybe waiting for what your institution is going to tell you is the format for the fall semester. But what I think we can do is think and plan long term, 4 years, 5 years down the line. And if you are looking for ways to stay motivated, to stay connected to the work that you're doing now, bring yourself back to the long-term goals that you have in mind when you began this educational journey, when you began this degree. What was that graduate school program that you were interested in? What was that fellowship? What was that job? What was that training? What was that larger goal that you had that maybe when you've been sort of in the trenches these past couple of weeks, weeks and months and years, you haven't been able to think about that. Maybe you're losing a little bit of motivation with this online format. Go back to those original goals that are the fall doesn't really matter. Think about them for 3 years, 4 years down the line.
I love that. Just to try to change the point of reference a little bit, I think can be super, super useful. I would add only one practical tip, Stephen, and I'm saying it not because I think that's in theoretically it's cool, or I mean I'm mentioning it because I have to do it every single day, and that is I really have to try hard, and it has been very, very helpful to keep myself away from multiple pieces of technology at a time. For me
Yeah.
personally, when I'm in a learning environment, I can't, my phone has to be somewhere else. It can't even be just on silent, because every time it lights up, I'm lost in it, right? I'm drawn to it. And I think that, yes, there's a little bit of fatigue around Zoom, or there can be a little bit of fatigue around virtual learning, but there's an additional layer of fatigue um, that comes from the fact that we're multiply engaged with machines and devices for many hours at a time. And I think that that can be problematic. It can be exhausting. It can be distracting. We know metacognitively that multitasking isn't an ideal way to operate, even though obviously we've gotten very good at it. So, when you say step away from the computer, I would also say, see if you can create just a couple of technology-free minutes throughout your day.
Yeah, I totally agree.
To the extent that us cyborg creatures are able to do that anymore.
I mean, there's so much about our current, quarantine and social distance world that has drawn us into our phones, our computers, our Netflix, our TVs, all
Yeah.
those things, and the taking a technology break is only brings good things.
Yeah. I have a question from a student here, Steve. And this is, it's always the hardest question that comes rolling in first. And we have just a couple minutes for questions. And for those of you out there, completely appropriate to send us a message, and we'll try to reply to as many of them as we can. The question is about community in this moment. This person who's sending in this question, she's actually pretty comfortable with a lot of the things that we've discussed. She's stepping away from her computer. She's making sure she's got her kitchen timer. She understands that 25 minutes is her ideal kind of amount of time for focused and intense thought, and then she steps away. She's doing all the right things. But what she really is missing is those conversations that take place immediately after class as you walk from one classroom to another. What she's missing is the kind of the organicness with which you could approach your professor before or after class, without having to set up an appointment, without having to feel like you were burdening anybody. What would you suggest for folks who are missing that kind of informal community and interaction? Are there ways to replicate that? What's your take on that? Because to me, this is a really poignant question. And I know that, essentially what's happening is everyone's out there watching really cool movies, and then they're walking out of the theater by themselves, instead of walking out with their friend or with their partner or with their kids. So what do you say to that? Because I think it's a tough one.
It's a really, really, really hard one. It's really hard. And I think to this student that has asked this question, thank you so much for bringing that up, because, for so many reasons, community is just essential to learning and to what we do in schools at every level. Community is why I'm in education. And I think the first place to start is to acknowledge that we're probably not going to replace what we've had before online. I don't think that there is a replacement for the feeling of sitting in a theater and a crowded theater and listening to live music. I don't think that we can replace that in this online format, and I don't think that we can fully replace the community of the educational world in this online format. So I think it's just good to sort of acknowledge that and say, okay, what should we do differently then? What should we expect? I think to begin with, and this is easier said than done, remember that at the end of the day, we are educators, we are a school, and every faculty member and administrator wants you to be successful, and you are never, ever a burden to reach out for a conversation, for a Zoom meeting, for an email. And that's harder for some students than it is for others. It's much easier sometimes for the organic interactions. And for folks that are struggling with sort of making themselves do that outreach to set up that meeting with their TA, their instructor, their advisor, this is where it's easier said than done. But I want to assure you that we are all here for you, and our number one goal is to help you be successful. So please do reach out to us. Don't be afraid to do that. I think that's where I would start, RJ.
Yeah, and I think too, it's wonderful to hear you say the way you opened this up. I couldn't agree more that stop trying to make something that's different the same. But also, just because it's different doesn't mean it's necessarily worse, right? It being different means it's different. So what I would say to this student, in addition to what you've said, which is just, be proactive about it, your professors want to hear from you. I also have discovered, and I'm not a student in this current moment, but I identify a person who's going to be in a meeting with me, and I message them during the meeting and say, hey, can we hop on the phone right after this? And then I essentially, I replicate in a way the kind of download that we all find so edifying after a lecture or after a discussion, or, hey, did I hear that right? So for me, I think it's kind of a funny, come full circle moment where it may be the case that having a study buddy has never been more important. And maybe that study buddy isn't just about reading your papers, and maybe that study buddy isn't just about making sure you understand the concepts, but maybe what they also do is hop on the phone with you for 10 minutes after a lecture so that everyone can kind of download a little bit. To me, if there are specific pieces of community that you're missing, see if there's an alternative that gets you all the good stuff that comes from that may just not look quite the same.
And yeah, the difference there, I think, is so important, RJ. Maybe your typical is that you leave the class with a group of people and 3 or 4 people are talking, and you may or may not get a word in edgewise,
right?
Or the sort of the conversation is very free flowing. There's a lot of value there,
right?
We're not going to replace that,
right?
But there is a ton of value in what you're suggesting of identifying one person and setting up a 5, 10, 15-minute conversation following the lecture. To do some of that download, to do some of that metacognitive work. And that is different than walking out the classroom with a group. And I think there's value there that's slightly different as well for that one-on-one conversation to do some of that community.
Absolutely. The other thing that I find helpful, I don't know if you think this is best practice, Steve, but I think professors respond really well to a student who just goes ahead and sets up 3 meetings throughout the course of a term. Go ahead and get them on the calendar. And then that they're scheduled, that they're happening, you can kind of anticipate them. And rather than reliving the kind of angst or the kind of anxiety that sometimes people feel about reaching out, go ahead and experience that thing one time. And then, you have 2 or 3 meetings set up, and that gives you a little bit of structure too.
I think that bit of advice is something that can be applied now and forever forward as a student. If there is someone, a faculty advisor, financial aid advisor, graduate school advisor, someone that you need to talk to, and you're going to need to talk to them again in the future, go ahead and set up those 2-3 appointments over a couple month period in advance. And rest assured, when that meeting is approaching, you're going to have something to talk to them about. Don't worry in the beginning, in the beginning of the summer, it's the beginning of June right now, and you're setting up 3 appointments, 1 in June, 1 in July, 1 in August with the instructor that you have right now. And you're worried, I don't want to waste their time in August. In August, the final exam is going to be approaching, the final paper is going to be approaching, the fall semester is going to be approaching, and you're going to have 6 to 8 weeks of material from the semester to talk with them about. Go ahead and put those appointments on their calendar now. Don't have to worry about getting a slot later on, and you know that they're coming, and rest assured you'll have plenty to discuss.
And the final cherry on top, Steve, it makes you look good, right? To be a student who's being that proactive. I mean, I can tell you as someone who taught college students for years, what a delightful thing to have happen is a student looking at the syllabus, seeing when the major assignments were due, and blocking off some time with me a week in advance of those assignments. It's like music to a college professor's ears, I think.
Especially when the alternative of that is the last minute email, I really need to talk to you right now.
That's
And
right.
more often than not, it's really tough to slide you in.
That's
So
right.
not only do you look great, but you avoid sort of the chaos that could come down the line.
The thing. It looks like we're touching on a lot of the things that people want to know about, but two more questions, Steve. I'm mindful of everybody's time, and we absolutely will not go over 59 minutes. Pace. Pace, especially in summer courses. I know we have some students, especially students who are new, who are taking courses for the first time in what I would call an accelerated format, right? So, if you're taking a course, one or two courses that last all summer, your pace is going to be similar to what a fall or spring pace would be. But some other students are in accelerated half summer courses where you're getting a full semester's material in a very, very compressed way. What's your sort of headline to students who are walking into these accelerated environments? What should they have at the top of their minds?
Number one, take less courses than you typically would.
Yep.
It may be a little bit too late for that advice for the first summer session.
Right.
And that's okay. You're in the course that you're in right now. I think the thing to be at the very top of your mind is to do a deep dive into your syllabus now if you haven't already.
Yeah.
Those deadlines and assignments come up very, very quickly. Drafts of papers will come up quickly. Midterms will come up quickly. And you want to make sure that you have a full understanding of that pace as quickly as possible, or as early as possible, as soon as possible. And this goes back to our last point: communicate that with the professor. What is your expectation for this assignment? What is your expectation for the final assignment? If you're in a 6-week course right now, you're probably in week 2, which means the final exam is 4 weeks away. It's pretty close. It is okay to right now begin to have a conversation with your instructor about that final assignment, whether it be a paper or an exam or whatever the format might be. Now's an okay time to start that conversation.
That's such good advice. And you start studying for your final exam the day the course begins, right? The day the course that's when final studying begins. And of course, you don't sit down and you don't put it in your calendar as a final study session, right? But study as you go, study as you go. This is why I think, Steve, you're saying shift that ratio around a little bit. It's not really 3 hours per 1 hour. It's going to be more like 4, 5, 6 hours per 1 hour because of the accelerated nature. I think that ratio piece is especially important. Final thing, Steve, and this is a professional courtesy for you because I know that you're having these conversations and I want to give you a microphone from which to shout this from the rooftops. I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. And then all of a sudden, I'm not really doing okay. And all of a sudden, I'm kind of behind the 8 ball, and I'm in an accelerated course format, and I'm virtual, and I don't really know my professor very well. I've never even shaken this person's hand. I've never even seen them face to face. I think there is we've said that this isn't worse. It's just different. Yes. There is one piece that I'm prepared to make that judgment a little, which is there's an isolation that can be easier to achieve in our current environment. People can't lay their eyes on you in the way that they could when you had to walk in and out of the door. I can't say, hey, I haven't seen you in class, right? It's a little easier to hide. Steve, what do you say to students who start to feel themselves slipping to the extent that they're able to? What should they do?
This is so important, RJ. And as you said, shouting this from a microphone, reach out and get some assistance. There is no judgment from this side of the table, of the screen. We are, when I say we, I say the collective we of faculty and administrators and higher ed professionals. And I'm certainly not speaking for every individual in the industry, but what I am saying is that we are, at the end of the day, educators, teachers, and our jobs revolve around supporting students in reaching their goals. And if you are feeling yourself slipping, if you are feeling yourself going into that isolation, and you can recognize that, as RJ pointed out, in normal times, you would organically have some of this outreach, organically have some of this community that you're missing. That's okay. That's okay to feel that way.
Yeah. Yep.
That is 100% normal. And it may not be the faculty member, your instructor, that you're comfortable reaching out to, but there are other folks that are here for you. There are your advisor, someone in the financial aid office, a peer, a friend that may know of some resources or may be able to connect you with someone else, a family member. But now more than ever, it's important to be patient with ourselves, show ourselves, as you say, RJ, some grace, and reach out for some help when we need it. And as soon as you start slipping, reach out for some help.
We can't help you. We can't help you if we don't know you need help, right? Probably the most frustrating thing about being in that helping role is when you lose the opportunity to help because you didn't know that help was required. Steve, I was gonna put a slide up, but I'm suddenly overwhelmed by a desire to not do that. I just want to talk through really quickly an executive summary of the things that we've discussed. And I want you to make sure that you catch me. But we talked about expectation setting and the fact that this summer is going to look a little bit different than the spring looked. We all kind of know what's going on now, and that students should be prepared for faculty to step up their expectations, because everyone kind of has a sense of the rules. If you don't know what the new rules are, make sure you plug in with your faculty to get a really clear understanding of what their expectations are. We talked about this false notion that everyone has a ton of time, right? And in fact, counterintuitively, we may not actually have as much time as we think. I think that it's a myth that we've all found a bunch of hours in the day. So take that seriously. Think about that when you're selecting how many courses to take. And think about it as you tweak this ratio of in-class time versus out-of-class work. We talked about this wonderful metaphor about the summer being a kind of lab where you can really think about your practices in a thoughtful and deliberate way to use this moment as a way to get yourself ready to hit the ground running for whatever the fall ends up looking like. We talked about a little bit of separation, creating some separation, even if it has to be a little artificial, between our school life and our work life. The two-browser idea, I think, is totally inspired. And then we walk through a set of practical tips. Everything from standing desks and moving your body through space, to thinking really carefully about your course selection, to being proactive about setting up meetings with your professor and connecting with a friend over the phone after a lecture has taken place. So, Steve, I'm so thankful to you. I'm so thankful to you for your collegiality, and you're just, you were smart when you were a student of mine, and you just get smarter and better at this every day. Thank you for the gift of your time and your insight. You're so good at this work.
RJ, well, thank you so much. That's incredibly generous, and I have so much of my current role, the work that I do, and the way that I do it. I have so much of that to thank you for. So, thank you for this conversation, this opportunity to talk to all of you, and good luck with the rest of your semester, your summer, and keep on keeping on.
Yeah, keep on keeping on, right? My email address is rjj9@columbia.edu. That's rjj9@columbia.edu. Steve, are you comfortable sharing your email address?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm at sgo2107. That's sgo2107@columbia.edu.
That tells you all how much older I am than Steve, that my digit is 9 and his digit is 2107. Last thing, folks, housekeeping. If you are enrolled in University Studies for Student Veterans, you are going to get an email from me this week with a survey. We're spending part of the summer revamping the course, refreshing the course, and we really, really want your feedback. So when you get that email, rather than just deleting it or popping it into a different folder, do take a quick look at it. It's going to be a short survey that we've created, but we'd really appreciate your feedback to help continue to build these tools and have these discussions. Keep on keeping on. We love all of you, and thank you for your time. And Steve, I'll be talking to you soon. Bye, everyone.